The phosphorescent glow swept across the radar scope in hypnotic rhythm, each rotation revealing new threats emerging from the darkness beyond the horizon. It was March 24, 1945, and aboard the USS Bush, positioned northwest of Okinawa at Radar Picket Station No. 1, Second Ass James Patterson maintained his vigil over the surface search radar that had become the eyes of the entire American defensive network. His fingers moved with practiced precision across the gain controls as the electronic beam painted ghostly contact symbols on the darkened screen. The numbers told a story that would have terrified conventional naval commanders. 50-plus aircraft, bearing 340 degrees, ranged 62 miles, converging on the picket line from the direction of Kyushu. Commander Roland West Home stood in the Combat Information Center, his hand reaching for the TBS radio handset, even as the implications of what he was seeing crystallized in his mind. The American fleet had arranged 16 radar picket stations in a geometric fence around Okinawa, creating an electronic barrier that Japanese pilots could neither see nor penetrate without detection. But this technological advantage, so carefully constructed and so thoroughly tested, was about to trigger something that no war college had anticipated, no strategic plan had adequately prepared for, and no amount of firepower could completely defend against. The Japanese had reached a different conclusion about naval warfare than the Americans. In Tokyo, military planners had transformed suicide attacks from desperate improvisation into systematic doctrine. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Kamikaze special attack units existed for a single purpose: to overwhelm American defenses through sheer determination and sacrifice, trading individual pilots and their obsolete aircraft for enemy warships. The mathematics were brutal and unambiguous. If one pilot in every 6 succeeded in reaching his target, the exchange rate favored Japan. A young man and a worn-out plane, worth perhaps $50,000, could destroy a $1 million destroyer and take hundreds of American sailors with it. The strategy depended on penetrating the picket line, breaking through the electronic fence, and reaching the invasion fleet anchored at Okinawa. The destroyers themselves, those radar-equipped sentinels positioned between the kamikazes and the main fleet, would become the sacrificial targets, the first line of defense that would absorb the fury meant for the transports and supply ships. The Pacific War had fundamentally transformed the nature of destroyer warfare. Ships that had begun the conflict as submarine hunters had evolved into something entirely new: electronic sentinels, platforms for sophisticated radar systems, command centers for coordinating three-dimensional air defense across vast stretches of ocean. The 7 operational picket stations by April 1st, with 9 more to follow as the campaign progressed, were positioned between 15 and 95 miles from Point Bolo on Okinawa's Zamper-Misaki Peninsula. Each destroyer maintained its assigned station at 15 knots, reversing course every 30 minutes to complicate targeting by submarines lurking beneath the surface. The USS Laffey steamed through the Pacific swells as part of this network, her Allen M. Sumner-class hull displacing 2,200 tons of seawater. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton occupied the Combat Information Center, a compartment that represented the cutting edge of American naval technology. The Laffey carried 336 men and an array of weapons specifically designed to destroy aircraft: 6 5-inch dual-purpose guns in twin mounts, 12 40mm Bofors in 2 quad and 2 twin mounts, 11 20mm Ehrlichen cannons, and throughout the ship, the latest fire control radars that would reshape the future of naval combat. The Mark 37 gun director with its Mark 25 fire control radar, combined with the integrated display systems of the Combat Information Center, represented something revolutionary in warfare. Unlike the primitive radar plotting rooms of 1942, this system unified multiple radar sources into a single tactical picture, air search radar that could detect targets beyond 60 miles, surface search capability extending to 15 miles, height-finding equipment that determined aircraft altitude with remarkable accuracy, fighter direction circuits that linked the destroyer to combat air patrols overhead, allowing controllers to vector fighters toward incoming threats before they came within visual range. The mathematics of this new warfare were revolutionary. Traditional visual gunnery achieved hit rates of less than 2% against maneuvering aircraft. Radar-directed fire control increased this to 20% under optimal conditions. When combined with proximity-fused shells that detonated near targets without requiring direct impact, the defensive firepower multiplied exponentially. A destroyer equipped with these systems could destroy aircraft that its gunners could not even see. Lieutenant Hao Chering commanded LCS-L-51, one of the gunboats assigned to support the radar pickets, and his assessment of the situation was characteristically blunt. The destroyers were bait, deliberately positioned to attract Japanese attacks away from the main fleet. The strategy was to draw the kamikazes toward the pickets, vector in fighter coverage, and destroy them before they reached the carriers and transports. It was a calculated sacrifice, using a few ships to protect many, accepting losses to prevent catastrophe. Across the East China Sea at Kanoya Airfield, Lieutenant Yukioki reviewed his attack orders with the pilots of the 2000 Worst Air Group. Operation Kikusui, the floating chrysanthemums, represented the first coordinated kamikaze campaign. 355 suicide aircraft and 341 conventional bombers would strike the American fleet in coordinated waves. Some pilots were barely 17 years old, their training consisting of 7 days of formation flying, 2 days of takeoff practice, 3 days of approach and attack simulation against stationary targets. Navigation training was minimal, because the escort fighters would guide them to the target area. Combat maneuvering was irrelevant, because their mission required only the ability to aim and dive. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, who had organized the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had transformed suicide attacks from spontaneous acts into systematic military strategy. Lieutenant Yukioki himself had led the first successful attack, sinking the USS Low on October 25, 1944, proving that organized kamikaze operations could penetrate American defenses. The pilots understood American radar capabilities better than most Japanese commanders realized. They knew that the destroyers positioned around Okinawa were not merely early warning stations. These ships controlled fighter aircraft that could intercept attacking formations 50 miles from the fleet, far beyond the range where traditional aircraft could defend themselves. But the radar pickets had a critical vulnerability. Operating in isolation 30 to 60 miles from mutual support, they could not concentrate defensive firepower. A determined mass attack could overwhelm individual destroyers before help arrived. The Japanese pilots believed they could exploit this weakness through overwhelming force applied at unexpected moments. As dawn approached on April 6, 1945, the American ships formed their defensive perimeter. Each picket station maintained a 5,000-yard patrol radius with a destroyer at the center, and 2 to 4 support craft arranged in diamond formation, maintaining 15 knots and reversing course every 30 minutes. The new radar systems transformed naval warfare into an electronic battlefield. The SC-2 air search radar swept the skies every 4 seconds. The SG surface search maintained continuous coverage of the ocean surface. Mark 12 and Mark 22 fire control radars locked onto individual targets for precision gunnery. The SB height-finding radar calculated aircraft altitudes for fighter interception. Combat Air Patrol maintained continuous coverage, though only 2 F-6F Hellcats or F-4U Corsairs operated per station during daylight hours. Response time from the carriers to the outer picket stations ranged from 20 to 30 minutes under optimal conditions. Those minutes would determine survival. At 0300 on April 6th, radar operators across the picket line detected the first wave of Kikusui No. 1. Multiple raids approached from the northwest, with the tactical plot showing over 100 contacts converging on the radar picket stations. Fighter Direction Officer Lieutenant Frank Adams vectored his available aircraft to intercept. 2 Corsairs against 30-plus Kamikazes. The mathematics were impossible. The Kamikaze formation had already descended to wave-top height, using the radar horizon to mask their final approach and limit the time available for defensive action. On Destroyer Bush at Radar Picket Station No. 1, the CIC team tracked incoming raids from multiple directions. Raid 1 consisted of 40 aircraft bearing 340 degrees. Raid 2 showed 20-plus bearing 015 degrees. Raid 3 had unknown composition but bore 285 degrees. Commander Westholm had trained his gun crews extensively for this exact scenario. The orders were explicit: continuous tracking of assigned targets, fire. When aircraft reached 12,000 yards, regardless of solution quality, maintain maximum rate of fire until target destroyed or passed overhead. No check fire for identification. Anything approaching the picket line was hostile. The Bush's ordeal began at 1500 hours. After her gunners shot down 2 approaching aircraft, a Nakajima B-6N torpedo bomber broke through the defensive fire. The Kamikaze struck between the 2 stacks on the starboard side, its bomb exploding in the forward engine room. Steam erupted through ruptured lines, killing 14 men instantly, but the Bush remained afloat. Damage control teams fought fires, while gunners continued engaging incoming aircraft. At 1700 hours, destroyer Colquhoun maneuvered to assist the Bush, bringing 4 Cap fighters with her. What followed was aerial chaos, as 40 to 50 Japanese aircraft swarmed over both destroyers. The Colquhoun took her first hit at 1730 hours when a Zero crashed into her main deck. 3 more Kamikazes struck in rapid succession, and Commander George Wilson ordered the ship abandoned as the Colquhoun broke apart and sank. 35 of her crew were lost. The Bush continued fighting despite severe damage. At 1725 hours, a second Kamikaze crashed into her port side between the stacks, nearly severing the ship. At 1745 hours, a third Kamikaze struck the port side above the main deck, and ammunition began exploding. Fires spread beyond control. At 1830 hours, the Bush rolled over and sank. 87 of her 307-man crew were lost, including members of Commander James Willis's staff, who had been aboard as Commander Destroyer Division 48. The survivors spent up to 10 hours in the water before rescue. LCS L-64 was first on scene at 2:30 hours, pulling exhausted men from oil-covered waters while under threat of continued air attack. The mathematics of April 6th were staggering. In one day, Kamikazes sank destroyers, Bush, Colquhoun, and Emmons, plus destroyer Minesweeper, Emmons, and 2 ammunition ships. 10 other ships suffered damage, but the radar pickets had fulfilled their mission. The main fleet at Hagushi anchorage remained largely untouched. The destroyers had absorbed the fury meant for the invasion force. The USS Laffey arrived at Radar Picket Station No. 1 on April 15, 1945. Relieving Destroyer J. William D. Commander Beckton reviewed the tactical situation with his department heads. The Japanese had shifted tactics after the initial attacks. Small groups now infiltrated at dawn and dusk. Individual aircraft used cloud cover and rain squalls for concealment. Coordinated attacks came from multiple directions to overwhelm fire control systems. The Luffy had survived kamikaze attacks at Lingayen Gulf and Iwo Jima, but Okinawa was different. The proximity to Japanese airfields on Kyushu and Formosa meant continuous attacks, no respite, no safe periods. General quarters lasted from dawn to dusk and often through the night. On April 16th, the situation developed exactly as Beckton had anticipated. At 0727 hours, radar contact was made, a single aircraft bearing 020 degrees, range 11 miles. The Val approached at wave-top height, using the morning sun for concealment. Beckton ordered hard right rudder and flank speed. The destroyer heeled sharply as she accelerated past 30 knots. The Val pilot adjusted his approach angle, aiming for the bridge. At range 2,000 yards, all starboard guns fired. The aircraft absorbed dozens of hits but kept coming. At 500 yards, a 5-inch shell detonated directly beneath the Val. The explosion tore off the left wing and sent the fuselage cartwheeling into the sea 50 yards from the Laffy's hull. But this was only the beginning. At IO 800 hours, CIC reported multiple raids converging on Station 1, estimated 50 aircraft in separate groups. Capping was engaging but heavily outnumbered. What followed was 80 minutes of the most intense combat in destroyer history. 22 kamikaze aircraft would attack the Laffy individually and in groups. The first 8 were destroyed by devastatingly accurate gunfire. The gun crews had developed a rhythm: track approaching aircraft, concentrate fire from multiple mounts, maintain continuous fire regardless of hits observed, switch to new target immediately upon splash. No celebration, no pause. The next aircraft was always seconds away. At 0827 hours, the 9th kamikaze overwhelmed the defensive fire. A Yokosuka D-4Y Judy approached from astern, where fewer guns could bear. Despite taking multiple 40mm and 20mm hits, the aircraft struck gun mount 53, the after 5-inch mount. The explosion killed 6 men instantly, including the mount captain, Gunner's Mate First Class Lawrence Dowski, who had been directing the mount in local control. Fires erupted across the fantail. Ammunition began cooking off. Mount 53 was destroyed, eliminating 1/6 of the Laffy's heavy firepower. The 10th kamikaze struck minutes later. Another Judy, attacking from the port quarter, crashed into the afterdeck house, destroying 2 20mm mounts and their crews. The fires spread toward the aftermagazine. Damage control parties fought desperately to contain the flames, while gunners continued engaging new attackers. The 11th attacker, a Val, dropped a bomb that struck between the stacks, penetrating 2 decks into the machine shop before exploding. The blast ruptured steam lines and knocked out electrical power. Gun mounts 42 and 43 lost power and had to be operated manually. Rate of fire dropped dramatically. At 0900 hours, the Luffy faced her most desperate moment. 4 kamikazes attacked simultaneously from different directions. The overwhelmed fire control system could only track 2. The first, a Val, crashed into a mount. The second struck the port side near the waterline. The third dropped a bomb that exploded in the after-engine room. The fourth was destroyed 100 yards from the ship by desperate close-range fire from a 20mm mount whose gunner, Seaman Arifort Rides, stayed at his position despite shrapnel wounds. The Luffy was burning from bridge to stern. Her rudder jammed hard left, forcing the ship into a continuous circle. Speed reduced to 8 knots. 1/3 of her crew were casualties. 6 gun mounts were destroyed or damaged. Commander Beckton received damage reports from all departments. The situation was critical, but not hopeless. The forward guns still functioned. Damage control teams were containing the fires. The ship remained afloat despite massive damage. When Assistant Communications Officer Lieutenant Frank Manson asked if they should prepare to abandon ship, Beckton's response became legendary. "No, I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun will fire." A nearby lookout added quietly, "And if I can find one man to fire it." 4 more kamikazes attacked in the next 20 minutes. The surviving gunners destroyed 3. The fourth, a Zero carrying a 550-pound bomb, crashed into the base of the forward stack. The explosion lifted the entire bridge structure before slamming it back down. Every man in CIC was knocked unconscious momentarily. When they recovered, thick smoke filled the compartment. Radar scopes flickered and died. For 3 critical minutes, the Laffy was blind and mute. The 20th Kamikaze approached during this chaos without radar warning or coordinated defense. Individual gun crews engaged on their own initiative. Gunner's mate First Class Robert Carr on Mount 44 spotted the Val diving from 8,000 feet. Despite the mount operating in manual mode, his crew maintained tracking and fired continuously. The Val exploded 500 feet above the ship, showering debris across the forward deck. The 21st Kamikaze came from astern, hidden in the smoke of the Laffy's own fires. A Cape torpedo bomber at wave height aimed for the forward magazine. Seaman Futrides, still at his damaged 20mm mount, saw the aircraft emerge from smoke 400 yards away. He triggered a long burst, walking tracers into the Kate's engine. The aircraft staggered, nosed down, and crashed 30 yards from the Laffy's port side. The explosion drenched the burning destroyer with seawater that helped suppress fires. The 22nd and final Kamikaze approached at A947 hours. By now, the Laffy had been under continuous attack for 80 minutes. The crew was exhausted, ammunition running low, defensive firepower reduced by 70%. But LCSL-51 had been fighting alongside the Laffy throughout. Lieutenant Chering ordered maximum speed and positioned his gunboat between the Kamikaze and the destroyer. The Val pilot had seconds to choose: continue toward the valuable destroyer or accept the lesser target. He chose the Laffy. The Kamikaze passed 50 feet over LCSL-51, its fixed landing gear nearly striking the gunboat's mast. Chering's gunners poured fire into the aircraft's belly. The Val began trailing smoke, then flame. It crashed into the sea 100 yards from the Laffy. The battle was over. The Laffy had survived 22 kamikaze attacks in 80 minutes. She had been hit by 6 aircraft and 4 bombs. 32 killed, 71 wounded. But she remained afloat. Her survival seemed impossible, yet the mathematics told the real story. The Laffy's gunners had fired over 8,000 rounds of ammunition. They destroyed 9 kamikazes with direct gunfire and damaged 4 others severely enough that they missed or crashed short. The fire control radar had maintained tracking solutions despite battle damage. The proximity fuses had multiplied defensive effectiveness. The Combat Information Center had coordinated the defense, even when partially disabled. Technology and training had prevailed over sacrifice. The radar picket system at Okinawa represented a fundamental shift in naval warfare. For the first time in history, electronic detection and fire control had become more important than armor or speed. The destroyers stationed around Okinawa were not merely scouts. They were command and control platforms managing a 3-dimensional battle space that extended 60 miles horizontally and 30,000 feet vertically. Fighter direction teams embarked on the picket destroyers revolutionized air defense. During the Okinawa campaign, they controlled over 5,000 fighter interceptions, resulting in the destruction of approximately 1,900 enemy aircraft before they reached attack positions. But the human cost was staggering. During the 82-day Okinawa campaign, the radar picket destroyers absorbed the fury of Japanese desperation. 15 destroyers and destroyer minesweepers sank on radar picket duty. 45 were damaged. Over 4,900 sailors were killed or wounded on the picket stations alone. The destroyers had fulfilled their mission as electronic sentinels and magnets for enemy attacks. They had protected the main fleet by sacrificing themselves. On May 4th, Kamikaze attacks sank destroyers, Morrison and Luce, at Radar Picket Station No. 1. The Morrison went down in minutes after being hit by 4 aircraft in rapid succession. 152 of her 31-man crew were lost. The destroyer's radar had tracked the incoming raids perfectly. Her guns had fired continuously. Her fire control had been exemplary. But when 40 aircraft attacked a single destroyer, mathematics became destiny. Captain Riki Hei Inguchi, who had helped develop kamikaze tactics, would write after the war about the radar picket battles. The American destroyers fought with incredible courage. Their radar gave them advantages we had not anticipated. They could see our aircraft forming up over our own airfields. They tracked us across hundreds of miles of ocean. Their fire control was devastating in its accuracy. But he also noted a critical observation. We believed the radar pickets were vulnerable because of their isolation. We were wrong. The radar connected them to a defensive network that stretched across the entire fleet. When we attacked a single destroyer, we faced the coordinated defense of dozens of ships and hundreds of aircraft. The technological gap had become insurmountable. Japanese pilots flying obsolete aircraft with minimal training faced radar-directed guns firing proximity-fused shells. American fighter aircraft, vectored by shipboard controllers, intercepted raids 50 miles from their targets. Electronic warfare had replaced visual combat. The psychological impact on Japanese operations was equally devastating. Pilots who had expected to find scattered, surprised targets instead encountered precisely coordinated defenses. Radar operators in air-conditioned compartments tracked their approaches from takeoff to impact. Fighter directors speaking calmly into radio handsets orchestrated their destruction with mathematical precision. By May 11th, Japanese naval commanders had modified their tactics in response to radar picket effectiveness. Attacks would concentrate on stations where weather degraded radar performance. Low-altitude approaches used terrain masking from nearby islands. Window chaff was dispensed to create false radar returns. Electronic warfare had evolved on both sides, but the Americans continued to improve their systems faster than the Japanese could develop countermeasures. New SP height-finding radars eliminated blind spots in vertical coverage. Improved IFF systems prevented friendly fire incidents. Data links between ships allowed coordinated defense of multiple stations. The technological advantage accelerated rather than diminished. The destroyer Hugh W. Hadley at Picket Station 15 demonstrated the evolved defensive capability on May 11th. Under attack by over 150 kamikaze and conventional aircraft in multiple waves, Hadley's CIC managed 6 separate radar plots simultaneously, while directing 12 cap fighters and coordinating gunfire with 3 supporting ships. The result, 23 enemy aircraft destroyed. Hadley was severely damaged but afloat, with 28 dead and 67 wounded. Without radar, the outcome would have been annihilation. The industrial implications were equally decisive. American shipyards were producing new radar sets at rates exceeding 200 per month. Japanese aircraft production had fallen to fewer than 500 planes monthly, most of obsolete design. The mathematical equation was inexorable. American technology was advancing faster than Japanese production could match. Each destroyed kamikaze represented months of training investment that could not be replaced. Each damaged American destroyer returned to service with improved equipment and experienced crews. The attrition warfare that Japanese commanders had calculated would exhaust American resolve, instead demonstrated American industrial supremacy. On June 22, 1945, organized Japanese resistance on Okinawa ended. The radar picket stations had been operational for 90 days. During that period, they had tracked thousands of air attacks, vectored fighters to intercept over 1,900 raids, and directly engaged approximately 600 kamikaze aircraft that penetrated to attack positions. The strategic implications transformed Pacific warfare. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, incorporated massive radar picket lines based on Okinawa experiences. Hundreds of destroyers equipped with the latest radar systems would create electronic barriers around invasion fleets. Fighter direction would be centralized in purpose-built command ships. The Japanese homeland would face not individual ship defenses, but integrated air defense networks spanning hundreds of miles. Admiral Mateo Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet, made his final assessment before conducting his own kamikaze attack on August 15, 1945. The American radar pickets have created an invisible wall around their forces. Our pilots crash against this wall like birds against glass. We see the target but cannot reach it. Technology has defeated spirit. The USS Laffey survived the war and served for another 30 years, eventually becoming a museum ship. Her radar arrays, though primitive by modern standards, had represented a revolution in naval warfare. The ability to see beyond visual range, to track multiple targets simultaneously, to direct weapons with mathematical precision, had changed combat forever. Commander Beckton, reflecting on the radar picket experience, provided crucial insight. We proved at Okinawa that wars would no longer be won by the side with the bravest warriors or the most willing to sacrifice. Wars would be won by the side with the best technology and the industrial capacity to produce it in overwhelming quantities. The radar picket destroyers were not just ships. They were the embodiment of American technical superiority. The human cost had been terrible. Nearly 5,000 American naval personnel were killed or wounded on radar picket duty alone. Nearly 2,000 kamikaze sorties were flown. Hundreds of young Japanese pilots crashed into the sea, achieving nothing but their own deaths. But from this sacrifice emerged a new understanding of warfare. Electronic systems would determine future battles. Information superiority would prove more decisive than firepower. The ability to process and act on data faster than an opponent would become the ultimate weapon. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, dozens of destroyers rest on the ocean floor alongside hundreds of Japanese aircraft, their crews honored by both sides for their courage in the face of impossible odds. But their sacrifice marked more than heroism. It marked the moment when technology became the dominant factor in warfare. The moment when radar operators in darkened combat information centers became more important than admirals on bridge wings. The moment when mathematical calculations replaced warrior intuition. The future belonged to nations capable of producing sophisticated electronics and training operators to use them effectively. The radar picket destroyers of Okinawa had not just won a battle. They had revealed the nature of all future conflicts. The invisible electronic battlefield would determine victory. The nation with superior sensors, processes, and data links would dominate. The age of electronic warfare had begun, written in the steel and blood of radar picket destroyers that stood between kamikazes and the American fleet. Their legacy lives not in their armor or guns, but in the radar arrays that gave them the power to see death approaching and the technology to defeat it.